Good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Vronsky, and I'll briefly try to introduce you to the Battle of Ridgeway. This is the first battle that the Queen's Own Rifles had fought, and it's the first modern battle fought by Canadians. And unlike many battles in which Canadians were involved, this is a battle that is very close to where we live. It's only about 2 hours, 2 hours tops from Toronto. The battle is actually two battles in one. There's the Battle of Ridgeway, or the Battle of Limestone Ridge, as it's sometimes known. And then in the afternoon, there was a second battle inside of Fort Erie itself, about which very little is known so far, because information about it was lost and suppressed, to an extent as it was about Ridgeway as well. It was a battle in which we did not fare very well, so this was not something that was often after the battle ended. The battle was not really celebrated as a victory, so as things tend to happen in history. This is the iconic image of the battle. It takes place June 2nd, 1866, during the last months of the Confederation debate. Confederation by then is almost a done deal. So in a sense, we could say this is modern Canada's battle. This is the iconic image. This is a lithograph that was produced in the United States in Buffalo. And it's one that mostly when we think of a visual of the Battle of Ridgeway, this is what we often think about. And certainly in the Ridgeway area, this was on milk cartons there. There was, Ridgeway Dairy used to use this image. It's a painting that hangs in the high school in the town of Ridgeway. But there are some inaccuracies in it. The enemy, of course, are the Fenians, and I'll talk a little bit more about who they were, but just quickly, they were Irish Republican insurgents who had invaded from the United States. The Canadians are here all represented as being, in classic scarlet uniforms of the British Army. That's not the case. People who wore green on the field were the QOR, and you see a rifleman wearing the rifle green from that period. That would have been the uniform that they would have worn in that era. So it was a mix of the green and the red. Although the Fenians, in their memory after the battle, don't remember the green being there, and that was the whole point of wearing green. Riflemen fought in a very different way than the way the infantry fought. It was a more modern approach to battlefield tactics. They worked more independently as skirmishers, where, of course, the regular infantry still fought almost in Napoleonic-like line formations. The other thing, of course, is the battle would not have been fought in this kind of line formation as illustrated. It probably would have looked more like this, with people taking cover. They were fighting through orchards and through farm fields, so it wasn't just this kind of Napoleonic clash of open ranks. The Canadian Army, it's at that point an entirely volunteer force. Starting in the 1850s, as the British Empire began to seriously expand and experience as well rebellions in India, as well the British became involved in the war in Crimea, there was difficulty relieving British troops in Canada. And so Britain began to encourage Canadians not only to confederate and become independently managing their own defense, but to modernize their militia system. And so develop this robust, voluntary, modern militia. It was usually organized by prominent Canadians who would sponsor a company of infantry. And gradually these companies began to be pulled together into battalions. And so the first battalion is formed in Montreal. It didn't serve continuously. It eventually ends up being the Canadian Grenadier Guards who are in Ottawa. But the second battalion is formed of various Toronto militia companies, and they're pulled together here into 10 companies, which become known eventually as the Queen's Own Rifles. They were originally called the Queen's Own Rifles of Toronto. Eventually they become the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada. Thus that number 2, 2nd Battalion. The Queen's Own Rifles are the oldest serving, continually serving infantry unit in Canada today. The officers are, of course, mostly, as I said, prominent, wealthy Torontonians who sponsor these companies. In this particular case, you're looking at Lieutenant Colonel Booker, who is a Hamiltonian, and had sponsored an artillery unit in Hamilton, and eventually came to command of the 13th Battalion, today the Ridings, the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, and they too participated at Ridgeway. And he, in fact, was in command of the operations at Ridgeway and in command of the battle at Ridgeway, and will take quite a beating, we'll see, for the mistakes that he makes on that field. So, you know, the leadership was in terms of talent, was mixed. It was a luck mix. It was luck of the draw. Whether you had a efficient officer, certainly Canadians had not seen any combat really since 1838, since the Hunter Lodge invasions at the end of the rebellion. So we had a long peaceful period. Some might have seen service in Crimea through the British forces, but Canada was at peace. So whether you had a talented officer or an able officer really was luck of the draw. There was no officers' school, although by 1862 we do start developing training on a battalion level for officers. And here you can see some of the earlier officers, Dury and Otter, who later will become the regimental commanders of QOR. The actual servicemen are often, they come together because of who the sponsor is. Sometimes they come from the same place of work. So this you're looking here, this is taken about 5 days after the Battle of Ridgeway, company number 4 of the QOR, the Merchants Company. So many of these men would have been in that battle, and I guess I use the term men lightly because some of them were just as young as 15 years old, who had not been expecting to see combat in militia service, and so their families often, sure, you want to play soldier, go ahead. No one had imagined that Canada would be invaded this way. You can just see how young some of these kids are. Here you see Company 10, the Highlander company, again in the QOR. In fact, Alexander Muir, who later would author The Maple Leaf Forever, Canada's unofficial national anthem until we have our own national anthem, who served in this company. And I would suggest that The Maple Leaf Forever that he's writing about is the one on the QOR badge. They were very poorly trained. Only half of the men who went to fight at Ridgeway actually had experience of firing and loading live ammunition in practice, let alone in battle. And of course, everyone carried an Enfield muzzle-loading rifle, which one shot at a time, that had a very complicated loading procedure. So if you hadn't practiced this ever, this would be difficult. Imagine having to do it when you're under fire on top of that. The Fenians who had invaded were mostly Civil War veterans. They had just been demobilized from this apocalyptic war that killed 2% of the American population in a span of 4 years. Many of them had served in crack elite Irish brigades, and now they have joined this radical Irish Republican movement, determined to take Canada hostage in the hope of precipitating a crisis in Ireland that would reduce the British will to remain in Ireland. So it wasn't about invading and conquering Canada, it was about seizing Canada hostage to, as I said, precipitate this crisis in Ireland, the Fenian Brotherhood. And of course, when the Fenian Brotherhood, this is one of their flags, the sunburst on the green. When the Fenian Brotherhood fights at Ridgeway, they fight under the name the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. The first time you hear that term IRA used, in fact. Although organizationally, it's not really the same IRA. You know, there's several generations of it, right up to the modern IRA today. This was the invasion plan. There were approximately 50,000 armed, hardcore, battle-trained Fenians available, and maybe about 200,000 supporters in the United States. It was the largest ethnic organization in the U.S. at that time. So often it's presented this idea that their plan is silly and it's folly. In fact, 50,000 men could have seized and held Canada hostage to precipitate this crisis. It would have meant that the British would have had to deploy enormous amounts of manpower to Canada or yield in Ireland. We raised, in a matter of 48 hours, 22,000 troops. So had the invasion gone through completely, it would have been 2-to-1 for Canadians to defend themselves. And the British presence, as I said, was very low at that point. The British were trying to get their troops out of Canada. There is this mythology that the Fenians were a drunken mob. Not quite true. They're led by a very talented officer, John O'Neill. He was in the U.S. Cavalry, and his specialty was anti-insurgency. He had fought Morgan's Raiders in Ohio, and in fact, he's quite well known for charging 1,000 Confederate Morgan Raiders with 40 horsemen, and he breaks the 1,000 Morgan's Raiders on Buffington Bar in the Tennessee River. So distinguished officer, very talented, very well organized, as all were his other officers. The Fenians arrived from as far away as Louisiana. There were some former Confederate, the Louisiana Tigers. There were guys from Tennessee, from Kentucky, Ohio. A number of Fenian regiments arrived. They mobilized in Buffalo, and then they would have attacked from Buffalo. That is what becomes the Fenian Raid in Canada. It is the first battle that Canadians fight in the era of photography. It's the first battle we fight in the era of the telegraph, in parliamentary democracy. It's the first battle we fight in the era of steam power. So it is indeed our first modern battle. It is very different from the era of the Mackenzie Rebellion just in 1937, which was still kind of Napoleonic smooth-bore age. It's also the last battle fought in Ontario against a foreign invader. The Fenians cross, as I say, from Buffalo on June 1st in barges. They land just between Fort Erie and Chippewa near Frenchman's Creek. They take Fort Erie, they occupy Fort Erie. There were a few British soldiers there. They're very quickly disarmed and taken prisoner. The Fenians blow up Sourway, or they burn actually Sourway's Bridge, cutting off this railway, the Buffalo Lake Huron Railroad. And then, as well, they march up to Black Creek and position flammable material on the bridge there in case they have to burn it down. And so they set up this defensive corridor. They cut all telegraph communications into Canada, but keep the ones into Buffalo operative. So the Fenians are in communication with their headquarters in Buffalo at this time. And then by the end of the first night, on June 1st, the Fenians, actually in the afternoon, set up their first major camp here. Approximately 600 Fenians here, at least maybe 400 here and here, so 200, roughly about 1,000 Fenians. The QOR are mobilized the night before, on May 29th, May 30th, as news already begins to be telegraphed that the Fenians have mobilized in a major way and are pushing across the border. They come by steamship on the morning of June 1st as the Fenians are maneuvering here. They then take the railway down to Port Colborne, and they're positioned at Port Colborne to protect the Welland Canal. I mean, that is essentially our worry, that the Fenians are going to seize the canal, and it's very easy to damage because you can just blow up the locks. Right? The 13th Battalion from Hamilton also arrives by train at Port Colborne, and they're positioned there. And then in the afternoon, a column of British troops who were stationed in Hamilton pick up other Canadian militia units and arrive here to protect the bridge at Niagara Falls, and then begin moving towards Chippewa. No one is quite sure where the Fenians are. Some reports accurately position them at Frenchman's Creek. Other reports position them at Black Creek. In fact, they're at both places. Canadian troops, British troops, do not have any maps. The best we have are postal maps that are torn out of almanacs. The Fenians had sent spies into Canada approximately 6 months earlier. And the spies had collected topographical county-level maps. So in fact, the Fenians had better maps than our own forces did. Moreover, the British commander overall of this operation mistakes Frenchman's Creek for Black Creek. And so the assumption is that the bulk of the forces are at Black Creek. And so now the British commander, Peacock, makes this plan that the Canadians are going to take a train to Ridgeway, and then they're going to march up Ridge Road and meet with the British column, and together attack the Fenians at Black Creek. That's the plan. Unfortunately, the Fenians had already staked out Ridgeway as an ideal place to first battle the British-Canadian forces. And so in the middle of the night, they force march from their positions at Black Creek to Ridgeway, and start positioning themselves early at dawn. As Canadians are arriving by train at Ridgeway, the Fenians have already taken up positions, and they already have a battle plan. And here you can see the bulk of the Fenians, approximately 80%, are way back in the rear north of Bertie Street, while skirmishers set up on what's going to be the field of battle. As well, you have this ridge that runs along the edge of the battlefield. They also take the ridge and line up on the ridge to set up a kind of cross fire that they hope to lure the Canadians into. Here, as you can see what that territory, that terrain looks like today. This is Bertie Road, and look at the view that you have into the distance. It's a very high ground. It's very subtle. You almost don't see it with the naked eye, but once you start sighting a rifle, which has up to 1,000-yard range, certainly effective range at around 500 yards. You can see the advantage of why we've chosen this ridge. And again, this is not an accident. Fenian spies the year before had already recce this terrain. Here you can see the disposition of the Fenian forces. They, as I said, set up on the ridge. These are Kentucky troops and two Indiana companies. There's an Ohio regiment up on top, as well as the Tennesseans, the New Orleans, and the 7th Buffalo Regiment of the Irish Army of Liberation, as they call themselves. And again, the idea is to set up a crossfire from this ridge here, and from here, the skirmishers will draw back and hopefully pull the Canadians into this field here, and there you can see again the ridge and what this field looks like today. This is Ridge Road here looking east. Booker is a problem. Booker is very ambitious, and so we believe that Booker already has received messages that the Fenians are in position. And so rather than marching to meet with the British, Booker wants all the glory himself. And so he decides he's going to attack the Fenians without meeting with the British first. And then he'll say, well, you know, I was attacked on my way to find you. And so that's how Booker now begins deploying his troops against the skirmishers. This tactic fails right away because the Fenians open fire too early, revealing their positions. And then Company 10 and Company 9. Company 9, by the way, are all U of T university students. They're writing their final exams. They're called out. They're told that if they report to duty, their whatever exams they have already written will be averaged out. So all these kids now rush to the battlefield. And Company 9 are held back because they're kids. At first they're held back, and then unexpectedly, when the Fenians open up from the ridge, suddenly Company 9 ends up being deployed to clear the ridge. And that's where the first U of T student is killed, on that ridge, clearing the Fenians off the ridge. This is kind of what the battle would have looked like. They're firing at each other for a while over long distances. The first casualty occurs right here on fence line number 2. It's still recognizable to this day. You'll see the property line if you ever drive up Ridge Road. We can argue Ensign Malcolm McEachran is modern Canada's first military killed in action casualty. He's pulling the fence. These were rail fences, of course, and then they would have to, either climb up on these rail fences, exposing themselves to fire, or try to disassemble the fence. And so Malcolm McEachran, a Sunday school teacher from Toronto, is pulling a fence rail out, and he's shot through the stomach by a Fenian round. And he'll die within 20 minutes on the battlefield. Our first casualty.
The uniform down in the museum.
The uniform is indeed in the museum with the bullet hole in it. The Fenians draw back. The second, plan B for the Fenians was if they can't kill Canadians in this kind of cauldron here, we'll draw the Canadians up towards these barricades, which the Fenians had erected in the night as well, breastworks, make them fight through these breastworks, and they're still only fighting skirmishers, and then we'll overrun them with our main force. Remember, 80% of the Fenians are still waiting as this battle is taking place with just the skirmishers. And this is the way they fought in the Civil War. You make the enemy come to your terrain rather than go into their terrain. So it seems at first as if the battle is progressing very well as we're pushing these skirmishers away, and the Canadians get a sense, we've broken the Fenian ranks, let's go get them, and now they start charging, especially the eager students. The eager students now end up charging across the road and actually circle behind for a while the Fenians and begin to approach the main battle group. of the Fenians. And here, fighting becomes the heaviest at what's known as the brick house and the barricade, as the QR are beginning to run out of ammunition, and now the 13th Battalion is deployed. Company 6 splits, and Company 2, Company 1, and Company 3 of the 13th Battalion now fight around the brick house. It's now green and red fighting together. And here you can see them charging the barricade over this fence line. This is the brick house as it was in the 1920s. This is the way it stands today, right on the corner of Burley and Ridge Road, and some of the bullet hits are still visible in the side of the house. And now, just as it looks like things have gone so well, something terrible happens. Somebody cries out, "Fenian cavalry." And to this day, we don't know where the cry came from. Booker, who is behind this barn, under cover, cannot see up the road. This is essentially the view where what's going to happen happens. And so when Booker hears cavalry, his immediate reaction is to order the troops to form a square. This is the way you defend against cavalry. Unfortunately, there is no Fenian cavalry, but there's very skilled Fenian riflemen. And so when you get this square formed, the Fenians open fire into this densely packed square. It's just a perfect target. And here you have a number of casualties begin to occur. At the same time, as this is happening, 3 companies of 13th Battalion are being deployed into battle. They've been held in reserve up until now. The QOR, who have never operated with the 13th Battalion, mistake the 13th Battalion for the British arriving. And so they assume that now British troops are arriving, they're running out of ammunition, and so they begin to give up the field for the British troops. This appears to the 13th Battalion arriving on scene as they start seeing the QOR falling back, that a retreat is occurring. And so now these guys turn and start falling back as well. In the meantime, Booker is trying to reform his square and is under heavy fire, and now he loses control of the field. And as these soldiers in the square see these guys falling back, they now panic as well and begin falling back. Leaving behind Company 6, Company 2, Company 1 at the brick house. They look back, and suddenly, where's the rest of my army? They're gone, right? And of course, Company 9 is right there. And of course, experienced Fenians see the Canadian ranks waver, they fix bayonets, and they charge, completely now breaking the Canadian ranks. As well, 2 more students are now killed in this charge because it's only 24 students facing roughly 700 Fenians. And so they're caught in this charge, and that's how these casualties occur. Of course, Booker is going to take the blame. This is going to be very humiliating for Canadians, which is one of the reasons that this battle is not talked about all that much. In the afternoon, the Canadians fall back to Port Colborne. In the afternoon, there's another battle in Fort Erie. 700 Fenians versus 72 Canadians. The QR are not there. I'll skip over the details of this battle, but certainly Canada's first modern urban battle because it's fought in the streets. Booker is disgraced. There is a government commission, but Johnny MacDonald is our Minister of Militia as well. And so there is, it's not really an investigation, it's essentially a cover-up. The Fenians themselves, they suffer approximately 15 casualties. It's hard to say because they bring their wounded and dead back to Buffalo. O'Neill ends up eventually retiring in Nebraska, where the town of O'Neill, the Irish capital of Nebraska, is founded, where every June 2nd they still hold dinners and celebrations over the invasion of Canada. And recently, raised a monument to the Fenian invasion of Canada. The inscription basically says how the Fenians made Canada by invading it. Right? Nice. For Canadians, of course, as I said, once the dead are brought back to Toronto, all of them, 9 killed, 3 of them U of T students. These are, as I said, our first modern military casualties. These are the following. Sometimes referred to as the Ridgeway 9. A memorial window will be installed for them at University College. After University College burns down, slightly different, I just learned today, thanks to Eric, a slightly different version. This is the one that's put up in the East Hall of University College. And in 1870, Torontonians raised this monument, the Volunteers Monument. This is the oldest standing public monument in Toronto. It's again on U of T campus. Here you can see the Queen's Park. If you're driving downtown from the north, you often pass this monument. The inscription says Canada erected this monument, but that's very controversial. Torontonians paid to raise this monument. What happens in Canada, in Ontario, is starting from the 1870s. We have, Canada's first separationists actually were not in Quebec, but we're in Ontario. Ontarians by 1870 are very unhappy with the Confederation deal. And so Oliver Moen, who becomes our premier for 20 years, leads what is a sovereignist movement in Ontario. Our government is sovereignist, and we go to war with Ottawa over provincial rights. And so Ottawa doesn't want to talk about Ridgeway, doesn't want to make Ridgeway the last battle fought by sovereign Upper Canada a symbol. And so the Ridgeway soldiers are forgotten, the veterans are forgotten. Nothing is done for them other than payouts of pensions for those who were wounded or for the families of those who were killed. And so the memorial stands until 1890, when John A. Macdonald dies. Veterans of Ridgeway gather at this memorial for the first time in 1890 as an act of protest for being, how they're being ignored. Demanding some kind of recognition for Ridgeway veterans. And that event becomes our first Remembrance Day. It's held on the anniversary of the battle on June 2nd, and for the next 30 years throughout Canada, our National Memorial Day is on the weekend nearest to June 2nd, sometimes in May, sometimes in June. And what happens is people bring flowers to the monuments and graves of soldiers, laying these flowers. It is still an event that often is still held in Niagara region today, known as Decoration Day. And once we go to South Africa, South African war casualties are commemorated in Decoration Day. And of course, when we go into World War I, we don't have the November 11th day the war ended. And so it's on June 2nd that World War I fallen are commemorated, and it's that way until 1931. In 1931, the federal government now passes a law, the Remembrance Day Act, moving Decoration Day memorial services, consolidating them with Armistice Day services on November 11th, and naming Armistice Day now as Remembrance Day. At the same time, Ottawa does not include the soldiers killed at Ridgeway. And so now they're forgotten completely. Starting from 1931, only the regiment commemorates the Ridgeway 9. So one of the things we're hoping for is that as the 150th anniversary is approaching, you might have seen that in the Throne speech, The Fenian raids will be commemorated officially in Canada. We hope that the Ridgeway 9 will be enlisted into Canada's Books of Remembrance in Ottawa, where the names of every fallen soldier is inscribed. And as well, that we rededicate the War Monument to now include these 9 soldiers plus another 22 that died from disease in service. So, for more information on the Battle of Ridgeway, you can certainly go to my websites. There's information there. As well, I put links to books that you can download for free that were written at that time about Ridgeway. And as well as my own book that was published recently by Penguin, kind of updating the history of Ridgeway, the American Fenian invasion in the 1860s.